During a routine inspection at the airport, a police dog starts barking uncontrollably at a seemingly normal pregnant woman about to board her flight. But when they ask to look at what was in her bag, the woman trembles and starts crying while trying to explain. What happens next is shocking. Before we continue, if you, like us, love animals, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any exciting stories. Thank you. Let's get back to our story. The international airport throbbed with its frenetic routine that October morning. Diana Mendes nervously adjusted her sunglasses as she walked towards security, her right hand firmly gripping the handle of her designer black handbag. The other hand instinctively rested on her prominent 8-month belly, as if she wanted to protect the life growing inside her, not only from the outside world, but also from the shadows of her own past. The terminal was particularly busy, packed with hurried executives with their briefcases, families embarking on long-planned vacations, and flight attendants crossing the corridors with precise steps and impeccable uniforms. Diana watched each face attentively, her restless eyes hidden behind the dark lenses that masked more than just the morning light. As she waited in line, her fingers nervously drummed against her bag. Inside, she carried much more than personal belongings. She carried her only chance at freedom. The last few weeks had been a meticulous exercise in planning, every detail carefully considered. Diana knew she wouldn't get a second chance. It was then that the sound reached her ears, the rhythmic click-clack of paws against the polished airport floor. Her heart quickened as she spotted Officer Carlos Rodriguez and his canine partner Max, an imposing Belgian Malinois, conducting their routine patrol. Diana had studied the airport's security schedules. This patrol shouldn't be there at that moment. The dog, known for his precision and controlled temperament, suddenly stopped. His ears perked up and his entire body tensed. Before Diana could process what was happening, Max began to bark frantically in her direction. They weren't aggressive barks, but rather a type of alert that made several passengers stop to watch the scene. "My flight," Diana began, her voice trembling slightly, "leaves in 20 minutes. I have all the necessary documentation, including medical clearance to travel." Her hands began to sweat, but she maintained control, years of practice in hiding her emotions evident in her seemingly calm posture. Diana felt the world spin for a moment. Her entire meticulous plan, all the sleepless nights planning every detail, every calculated move in recent weeks, everything seemed to crumble before her eyes. But there was something about the dog's behavior that intrigued her. It wasn't the typical reaction of a sniffer dog to detect illicit substances. As she was led to the inspection room, Diana maintained her outward composure, but her mind was working frantically. Years of surviving under constant surveillance had taught her to always have a plan B. What no one at the airport knew was that she had already anticipated this possibility. In fact, she was counting on it. Officer Carlos watched as Diana walked, noticing something in her behavior that didn't fit the typical profile of people trying to evade security. There was a dignity in her bearing, a quiet resolution in her movements that contrasted with the tremor in her voice. Max remained restless, his eyes fixed on Diana, not in a threatening way, but with an intensity that surprised even his experienced trainer. The dog seemed to be trying to communicate something that went beyond his conventional training. As they approached the inspection room, Diana took a deep breath, readjusting her sunglasses again. Under the lenses, her eyes revealed not only the fear of discovery, but also a fierce determination. She wasn't just running away, she was executing a plan far greater than anyone could imagine. The inspection room was small and austere, with white walls and a single metal table in the center. A security camera blinked silently in the upper corner, its electronic eye recording every movement. Diana sat in the chair offered, her bag now resting on the cold table. Officer Carlos positioned himself on the other side, while Max remained seated near the door, still restless. "Ms. Mendez, I'm going to need you to open the bag, please," the officer requested, his voice maintaining a professional but not threatening tone. Diana hesitated for a moment before placing her hand on the bag's clasp. Her fingers trembled slightly as she manipulated the fastener. The metallic sound echoed in the silent room as the bag opened, revealing its meticulously organized interior. It was at this moment that Max began to approach the bag, his snout sniffing the air with renewed interest. Officer Carlos, intrigued by the dog's persistent behavior, began to examine the contents of the bag more closely. But the inspection continued, and soon other items began to appear. 3 different passports, all with her photo, but with distinct names. And then, hidden in an inner compartment, a thick wad of euros. 50,000, as a quick count would reveal. Diana nodded silently, knowing that this moment was crucial. As she was led down the hallway, she noticed that Max continued to follow her, his behavior even more intriguing to the officers present. Diana removed her sunglasses slowly, revealing not only the bruises around her eyes, but also a look of steely determination. "Diana Mendez is my real name," she replied, her voice low but clear. "The others are tools for survival." "Progesterone XR," Diana answered. "An experimental treatment for high-risk pregnancies, not yet approved in the country, but—" She paused, taking a deep breath. "It's the only chance I have of carrying this pregnancy to term." "Lost," Diana completed, her voice laden with contained pain. "All lost because my husband refuses to allow any medical treatment he doesn't personally approve." Diana adjusted in her chair, a protective hand over her belly. Outside the room, Max remained restless, occasionally emitting small whimpers that seemed strangely synchronized with Diana's moments of greatest tension. Diana leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Other women, other pregnant women, other victims." She paused, looking directly into the detective's eyes. "And when I tell you everything, you'll understand why I need those passports, and why 50,000 euros is a small price to pay for freedom." The silence in the interrogation room was broken by the soft sound of footsteps in the hallway. Detective Raquel watched Diana intently, processing her last words. Outside, Max remained alert, his eyes fixed on the door as if sensing something that humans couldn't yet perceive. Diana settled back in her chair, her hands intertwined over her prominent belly. "I met Eduardo Valente 5 years ago," she began, her voice taking on a distant tone. Is everything a woman could want. Charming, successful, seemingly gentle." "Yes, the same one," Diana confirmed, noticing the reaction. "The recently appointed Secretary of Homeland Security, my husband." She paused, taking a deep breath. "The man who turned my life into a controlled nightmare." "The first pregnancy was when everything started to change more drastically," Diana continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Eduardo insisted that I use only the doctors he approved, take only the medications he provided. When I started having complications, he convinced me it was all my own stress." "The doctors?" Diana let out a bitter laugh. "They all seem more concerned with pleasing Eduardo than with actually taking care of me. I only found out much later why." Diana straightened up in her chair, her eyes shining with a mixture of anger and determination. "Forged records," she declared firmly. "Part of Eduardo's plan to discredit me if I tried to escape. If you try to escape, I'll make your current hell a paradise compared to what's coming." Those were his exact words. "The other pregnancies," Diana continued, her voice now firmer, "they all ended the same way. Mysterious complications, medications that were supposed to help but only worsened my condition. And after each loss, Eduardo was there, consoling in public, but at home." She unconsciously touched the bruises on her face. That's when chaos erupted in the hallway. Max began to bark frantically, and raised voices could be heard through the door. Diana paled visibly, recognizing a particular voice. The door to the interrogation room burst open, revealing Eduardo Valente in all his imposing stature, impeccable suit, authoritative posture, perfectly calculated smile. 2 private security guards flanked him, and a man in an expensive suit, clearly a lawyer, held a file of documents. Detective Raquel stood up, ready to intervene, but Eduardo was already presenting an official document. "A court order," he explained smoothly, "demanding the immediate release of my wife. As you can see, she is not mentally capable of making decisions at this time. The stress of pregnancy, you understand." Diana remained motionless in her chair, her eyes fixed on a distant point, while Max continued barking in the hallway as if desperately trying to communicate something that no one could yet fully comprehend. "You really thought you could run from me?" he whispered, so low that only Diana could hear. "As naive as ever." His smile remained intact as he stepped back, but Diana felt a familiar shiver run down her spine. "Mr. Valente," Raquel began, her voice firm and professional, "we still have serious questions to discuss. Your wife was found with false documents and unauthorized medication." Eduardo adopted an expression of studied sorrow. "It's a delicate situation," he explained, his voice modulated to express concern. "As you can imagine, I didn't want to publicly expose my wife's difficulties, but she needs professional help, not accusations." From the hallway, Max's barks continued, now interspersed with anguished whimpers. Officer Carlos was trying to calm the dog, but there was something in the animal's behavior that intrigued him deeply. In his years of partnership, he had never seen Max act that way. "The medications found," Raquel insisted, "are a serious matter. Progesterone XR is not approved in this country." It was at this moment that something unexpected happened. Max, having finally broken free from Officer Carlos's control, burst into the room barking furiously. But this time, his barks weren't directed at Diana. The dog was fixated on Eduardo. Officer Carlos tried to call Max back, but the dog was determined. He approached Eduardo, his snout pointing insistently at the pocket of his overcoat. That's when a small bottle, identical to the one found in Diana's bag, fell to the floor. The white pills scattered across the floor, and Max immediately recoiled, growling. "Interesting," she commented. "Exactly the same type of bottle found with your wife. Mr. Valente, could you explain why you're carrying an unapproved medication that, in your own words, is just a fixation of your wife's?" "In that case," Raquel replied, "you won't mind if we compare the 2 bottles in our lab, correct?" "It will take approximately 20 minutes, she informed Detective Raquel, who was observing the process through the glass of the observation area. Beside her, Diana remained seated in a chair, refusing to return to the company of her husband, who was waiting in another room under the surveillance of Officer Carlos and Max. Diana nodded slowly, one of her hands resting protectively on her belly. "I didn't know specifically that he would carry it today, but I know his methods. Eduardo always plants evidence before he acts. That's how he protects himself." "There was a pattern in my previous pregnancies," Diana continued, her voice low but firm. "Whenever I started to question the medications he provided, whenever I tried to seek independent medical help, something happened. Sudden complications, unexplained emergencies." "I don't think," Diana interrupted. "I know. After the 3rd loss, I started to keep samples of everything he gave me. I found an independent lab, paid in cash, using a false name. The results..." She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. "Let's just say they weren't the medications they were supposed to be." "The samples are completely different," she declared as soon as Raquel entered the lab. "The bottle found with Ms. Mendez actually contains progesterone XR, although not approved in the country. But the bottle of Mr. Valente," she hesitated, consulting her notes, "contains a combination of substances that would be extremely harmful to a pregnant woman." Diana let out a bitter laugh. "Let me guess," she said. "Substances that could induce an abortion, but could also be explained as a natural complication of pregnancy." "That's what he was planning," Diana continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I'd be caught at the airport with false documents and suspicious medication. He'd appear as the concerned husband, take me home. And then—" She didn't complete the sentence, but everyone understood the implication. "We need more," she said finally. "Even with this evidence, his political power is still considerable. He can claim he didn't know what was in the bottle, that someone planted it." "My bag," Diana interrupted suddenly. "It has a hidden compartment you haven't found yet. Inside—" She paused, looking directly into the detective's eyes. "Inside, there's an encrypted flash drive and a diary. The diary contains dates, names, details of every medication he forced me to take in my previous pregnancies, and the flash drive—" A sound of commotion from the hallway interrupted her speech. Eduardo's voice could be heard, raised and authoritative, demanding her immediate release. Max began to bark again, his sound echoing through the hallways of the lab. Detective Raquel was already in motion, her cell phone in hand. "I need a tech team now," she ordered, "and keep Secretary Valente where he is. No one lets him leave the airport." "There," Diana indicated, pointing to a seemingly normal seam on the bag's inner lining. "You have to press the corners in a specific sequence." Inside, exactly as Diana had described, was a black flash drive and a small brown leather-bound notebook worn from use. Detective Raquel put on gloves before removing the items, treating them with the care due to crucial evidence. "Detective," he said, "before you open that flash drive, there's something you need to know. Diana isn't just carrying our child, she's carrying a highly sophisticated monitoring device. The device monitors her vital signs in real time," Eduardo continued, "and it's connected to an automated system. If I don't enter a specific code every 12 hours, certain very sensitive information about various important figures will automatically be sent to the press. He implanted it during my last medical appointment," she explained, her voice just a whisper. "I was sedated. When I woke up, he showed me on his tablet how the device worked, how he could monitor every heartbeat, every fluctuation in my blood pressure." "That's why you didn't run before," Raquel concluded, finally understanding. "He always knew exactly where you were, how you were feeling." On the other side of the intercom, Eduardo's laugh was soft, almost gentle. "See how creative she is? Always inventing elaborate stories. The doctors tried to warn me about her paranoid tendencies, but I always wanted to believe she would get better." "The device is real," confirmed the lead technician, observing the readings on his equipment, "and sophisticated. I've never seen anything like it outside of high-security military installations." Diana settled back in her chair, her face showing a renewed determination. "He's bluffing," she said firmly, "about the compromising information. Eduardo would never risk his own position that way. The device is real, yes, but its main purpose has always been to keep me under control, to make me feel completely helpless." "Detective," he called, "I think you should see this. We found something in Mr. Valente's car. It appears to be a set of medical equipment, but unlike anything I've ever seen before." "We need to disable that device," Diana declared, her voice firm despite the evident fear in her eyes. "And we need to do it before he finds a way to get rid of the evidence we already have." While the tech team worked frantically to understand the device implanted in Diana, Detective Raquel was urgently called to the airport parking lot. What she found in the trunk of Eduardo's car made her blood run cold. A sophisticated medical suitcase, filled with surgical equipment and carefully organized vials. Raquel photographed everything meticulously with her cell phone before returning to the lab. Upon entering, she immediately noticed that something had changed. Diana was smiling, a genuine smile that illuminated her face for the first time since her detention. On his monitor, a series of graphs and diagrams pulsed in real time. "These are the readings of Ms. Mendez's vital signs," he explained. "The device is indeed sophisticated, but it has a fundamental flaw. It was designed to monitor specific stress patterns." "And that's important because," Raquel inquired, sensing they were close to a crucial discovery. It was at this moment that Max, who was lying quietly in a corner of the room, suddenly raised his head and began to sniff the air intently. Officer Carlos, who knew every nuance of his canine partner's behavior, frowned. All eyes turned to the dog, who was now sitting at attention, his gaze fixed on Diana. Officer Carlos approached his canine partner, carefully examining the tactical vest that Max was wearing. In a discreet compartment, perfectly sewn into the inside, he found a small vial, identical to the others, but intact. Detective Raquel carefully picked up the vial, a smile of admiration forming on her face. "You weren't running away," she said, finally understanding. "You were setting a trap." Dr. Marina, who had just analyzed the new vial, confirmed, "This is definitely the legitimate medication. The formula matches the international specifications for progesterone XR exactly." The sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway interrupted the conversation. A young police officer entered the room, breathless. "Detective, we just received some information. We've identified one of the women in the flash drive photos. She was one of the victims of a case closed 3 years ago, a pregnant woman who died under suspicious circumstances. The victim's name was Clara Oliveira, and her photo was now projected on the lab screen, a smiling young woman in an advanced state of pregnancy with eyes that sparkled with hope. Diana watched the image with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I knew her," Diana revealed, her voice low but firm. "It was early in my marriage to Eduardo. She attended the same support group for high-risk pregnancies that I frequented. At the time, I didn't understand what was really happening." "The case was classified as a natural death due to complications in pregnancy," Raquel read, her eyes quickly scanning the document. "But there are inconsistencies in the medical report. Notes about experimental treatments, authorized by the husband. He's one of Eduardo's main collaborators. It's in all the notes I kept in the diary. Every consultation, every special treatment I received went through him." Diana paused, taking a deep breath. "But there's something else about Clara that you need to know." The lab screens suddenly filled with documents, spreadsheets, and photos. It was a meticulously organized file detailing a complex scheme of unapproved drug testing on vulnerable pregnant women. "Eduardo has always been obsessed with control," Diana continued, observing the documents with a knowing look. "But it wasn't just about controlling his guinea pigs. He was trying to develop something bigger. A method of completely controlling the gestation, of interfering with fetal development in ways that conventional medicine would consider unethical." Dr. Marina, who examined the technical documents, visibly paled. This is monstrous," she murmured. "They were essentially using pregnant women as living laboratories, testing combinations of experimental drugs without any consideration for the risks." The case was closed 3 days after Eduardo assumed his first political office of relevance, Raquel completed, consulting the records. And coincidentally, the lead investigator on the case was promoted the following week. "That's why Max reacted so strongly to you from the beginning," he commented. "We recently started an experimental training program for detecting victims of human trafficking and abuse. The dogs are trained to identify certain chemical markers released in situations of prolonged extreme stress." Detective Raquel stood up abruptly, a new urgency in her movements. "We need to act fast," she declared. "Now that we have access to these files, Eduardo will certainly try—" Diana brought her hand to her neck, her eyes widening in panic. "He knows," she whispered. "Somehow Eduardo knows we found the files. And now he's activated some kind of emergency protocol," the technician explained, his eyes fixed on the increasingly alarming readings. "The device is emitting microelectrical pulses, forcing a stress response in the body." Diana, still conscious but visibly in discomfort, grabbed Raquel's arm. "The lab," she managed to say between short breaths. "In the basement of Central Hospital. That's where he does the tests, where he keeps the physical records." That's when Dr. Marina had an idea. "The BARKS!" she exclaimed. "The sound frequency! Maybe we can use that!" The dog, as if understanding the importance of the moment, maintained his barks in a rhythmic pattern. The technician quickly adjusted his equipment to analyze the sound frequency. He didn't need to finish the sentence. He was already connecting equipment, creating an improvised sound amplification system. Diana, now paler than ever, maintained consciousness through sheer willpower. The amplified sound of Max's barks, modulated to the specific frequency, filled the room with an almost painful intensity. For a few seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then, suddenly, the device on Diana's neck emitted a sharp hiss and stopped working. But the victory was momentary. A new sound invaded the room, emergency sirens from the airport, followed by a message on the public address system requesting immediate evacuation due to a security incident. "That's not all," Diana warned now more firmly. "The lab at Central Hospital, he would never leave the physical evidence intact if he knew he'd been discovered." Diana tried to get up, but Dr. Marina stopped her. "You need immediate medical care," she insisted. Central Hospital was only 10 minutes from the airport, but every second seemed like an eternity. Detective Raquel was coordinating the operation by radio while her vehicle cut through the morning traffic, sirens on. In the back seat, Diana was under the attentive care of Dr. Marina, while Max remained alert by her side. Diana held tightly to a small folder that they had recovered from her bag. "The project had a specific structure," she explained, her voice firmer now that the device was deactivated. "Eduardo kept physical records of everything. He didn't just rely on digital files." "Control," Diana answered. "He kept compromising documents about everyone involved, doctors, nurses, hospital staff. Everyone had something to lose if the scheme was discovered." Upon arriving at the hospital, the scene was one of apparent normalcy. Patients entered and exited, staff circulated. Nothing indicated the clandestine operation occurring several floors below. Raquel quickly organized her team. "We'll split up. Team Alpha through the main elevators, Bravo through the emergency stairs. Maintain constant communication." "We don't have a choice," Diana interrupted. "That lab is a maze of corridors and false rooms. Without me, you'll waste precious time searching in the wrong places." "Other victims," Diana whispered. "There must still be patients down there." "There," Diana pointed when they reached the last level. "Door 33B. It looks like a normal filing room, but there's a hidden entrance to the main lab." "There's someone else here," Carlos whispered. "Someone who isn't with the cleaning crew." The team silently divided into 3 groups. The first, led by Detective Raquel, would go to the main lab. The second, with Officer Carlos and Max, would track down the potential victims. The third group would establish a perimeter to prevent any escape. "Go with Officer Carlos," the doctor whispered. Those women will need to see a friendly face, someone who understands exactly what they're going through. The corridor branched in several directions, each fork presenting new choices. They designed this as a labyrinth on purpose, Diana explained in a low voice, to disorient the patients, to make them feel completely lost and dependent. Here, Diana confirmed, recognizing the discrete numbering on the doorframe. This is one of the observation rooms. The scene inside the room was disturbing in its clinical normality. 3 women in different stages of pregnancy were sitting in hospital beds, connected to monitoring equipment. Their eyes widened in fear at the sight of the officers, but it was Diana who captured their attention. "They said you were mentally disturbed," commented another patient, older, her hand protectively over her prominent belly, "that you were making up stories about the treatments." "We need to move them now," urged Officer Carlos, his radio crackling with updates from Detective Raquel's team. "The cleaning crew is approaching this sector." As they worked to liberate the patients, Carlos's radio came alive. Detective Raquel's voice sounded urgent. "We found the main files. Dozens of folders, records of at least 20 women in the last 3 years. But there's more. Financial documents, international transfers, names of politicians and businessmen involved." "Eduardo," Diana murmured, recognizing the authoritative voice that stood out in the confusion. "He came personally to supervise the destruction of the evidence." "There's an emergency exit at the end of this corridor," Diana informed. "It leads directly to the staff parking lot, but we need to pass through the main wing of the lab to get there." "No," Diana interrupted, her eyes shining with a fierce certainty. "They can burn papers, break equipment, erase digital files, but they can't erase us. They can't silence our voices, not anymore." "Wait," Diana whispered, stopping in front of a seemingly ordinary door. "There's something we need to get first." "The backup of the backup," she explained quickly. "Eduardo is obsessive about records. He keeps copies of the copies, always in different places. This is the most complete file, the one he uses to blackmail the others involved in the scheme." "Too late," Eduardo's voice replied, loaded with a cruel confidence. "You have no idea of the real scope of Project Genesis. This goes far beyond a simple drug scheme." Diana signaled for the group to remain where they were, while she and Carlos carefully approached the entrance to the main lab. The scene they found was chaotic. Documents burning in metal trash cans, computers being destroyed, and at the center of it all, Eduardo Valente, still impeccably dressed, supervising the destruction with a cold smile. "It's over, Eduardo," Diana declared, her voice firm despite the fear she still felt in his presence. "We have all the necessary evidence." It was at this moment that Max, who had been silently positioning himself, began to bark. Not his previous warning barks, but a different sound, almost melodic. Small listening devices, hidden throughout the lab, began to fall from the walls, their circuits overloaded by the amplified sound of Max's barks. He didn't finish the sentence. Max, moving with the trained precision of years of police service, intercepted him with a threatening growl. At the same time, the 3 rescued women emerged from the shadows, each carrying one of the flash drives recovered by Diana. Detective Raquel was already handcuffing Eduardo, reciting his rights with a satisfaction that was only slightly professional. Around them, other members of the cleaning team were being detained, their attempts to escape thwarted by the established police perimeter. Diana watched the scene with a complex mixture of emotions. 5 years of fear, control, loss and pain finally coming to an end. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the movements of the baby. Movements stronger now, as if the child also sensed that the danger had passed. In the room adjacent to the main lab, the forensic technicians had discovered a file hidden behind a false wall. It was a meticulously organized collection of videos, documents, and medical records dating back long before the official start of Project Genesis. Diana examined the documents with growing horror. Other clinics, other states. He was testing and refining the process long before he knew me. Vulnerable, Diana completed, her voice low, desperate for help, willing to trust anyone who promised to save their babies. Max, still alert but calmer now, remained beside Diana like a silent guardian. Officer Carlos organized the preservation of the evidence that had survived the attempt at destruction. The messages revealed connections with clandestine clinics in several countries, all operating under the guise of treatment centers for high-risk pregnancies. The scheme was bigger and more organized than anyone had imagined. Dr. Marina returned at that moment, her face showing signs of exhaustion, but also of relief. "The 3 patients are stable," she reported. "The preliminary tests suggest that we were able to interrupt the experimental treatments in time to avoid permanent damage." "We'll find them," Detective Raquel promised, placing a comforting hand on Diana's shoulder. "Every single one of them. With these records, we can start tracking down all the victims, offer help, seek justice." "It's not just Eduardo," she said, showing the screen to Raquel. "Someone else knew we were coming here today. Someone is trying to erase tracks at other clinics right now." But there was something different now in the air of urgency that permeated the operation. It was no longer the despair of before, the feeling of fighting an invisible and all-powerful enemy. It was the focused determination of people who knew exactly what needed to be done. Diana watched the movement around her, feeling a new strength grow within her. Her hand found the small vial of legitimate progesterone XR, still secure in her pocket, the medication that Max had protected from the beginning. The baby moved in her womb, as if responding to her words. For the first time in a long time, Diana allowed herself to smile. A genuine smile, free from the fear that had accompanied her for so long. 3 months later, Diana walked through the illuminated hallways of the K9 unit of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Her step was light, sure, so different from the frightened woman who had crossed the airport that fateful morning. In her arms, cradled with care, was Sophia, her 2-week-old daughter, healthy and strong. Max, who had become a constant presence in her life since the day of the operation, rose from his post when he saw her arrive. The dog approached carefully, his snout gently sniffing the baby before sitting down beside Diana, assuming his now familiar position of protector. Diana stroked Max's head with her free hand. "He was the first to see through the lies," she replied, "to see the truth that everyone else ignored." "And Eduardo?" asked Carlos, although he already knew the answer. "She has something better," Raquel replied. "She has a mother who fought with everything she had to protect her, and not only her, but hundreds of other women and children. It's amazing how our most basic instincts can reveal truths that our society tries to hide," commented Dr. Marina, who had arrived for her weekly follow-up visit. Max wasn't just sniffing substances, he was identifying human suffering in its purest form. "You know what's more ironic?" Diana reflected. "Eduardo always talked about control, about power. But in the end, it was a simple bark that destroyed his entire carefully constructed empire." "What are you going to do now?" asked Carlos. "Sometimes," Diana said, her voice filled with contained emotion, "our saviors come in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes all we need is someone, or something, who can see through the masks that people wear, who can identify the truth hidden beneath layers of lies and manipulation. And sometimes," Diana concluded, "it all starts with a simple bark.